All right, let's dive into one of the wildest things you'll ever see in financial markets, the parabolic run. And today, we're going to zero in on silver, specifically those really rare, totally explosive moments when its price just seems to defy gravity and shoot straight up. So, what actually happens when a market goes vertical? I mean, this question, it gets right to the heart of market psychology, doesn't it? We can just forget about slow and steady gains for a minute. What we're talking about here is price action that's so extreme it grabs everyone's attention and literally rewrites fortunes and, yeah, misfortunes in just a matter of weeks. You know, this quote just captures it perfectly. Silver blow-offs are rare and loud. Think about that for a second. These aren't just your everyday market moves. They are major events. Rare means that your standard run-of-the-mill analysis is probably going to miss them completely. And loud? Well, loud means that when they do happen, oh, believe me, everyone knows about it. So we're talking about these parabolic blow-offs. But what exactly is a blow-off? Let's take a look under the hood and figure it out. Okay, so what's really fascinating here is the combination of things that have to happen. It all starts with momentum, right? A rising price starts attracting more and more buyers. Then that triggers FOMO, that purely emotional fear of missing out. And here's the kicker. This whole thing often happens in what's called a thin market. All that means is there just aren't many sellers around. So you can imagine, with every new wave of frantic buyers, the price just gets shoved up even more dramatically. And listen, this is a really crucial point. If you pull up, say, a 20-year chart of silver, these huge blow-offs, they can look like tiny little blips. But that completely smooths over the violent reality of what's actually happening. It hides the sheer, insane speed of the climb, and maybe just as important, it hides the long, painful years of just going sideways or grinding down that almost always seem to follow. Okay, so this brings us to a really big problem. When you get into one of these chaotic periods, all the traditional tools, all the old rules that analysts love to use, they can just completely break down. Frankly, they're just not built for this kind of wild environment. Here's a good way to think about it. Normal market swings, they're kind of predictable, like the tides. They operate within a certain set of statistical rules. But a parabolic blow-off, that's a tsunami. It is a massive outlier event that just completely warps all the averages and makes any kind of analysis based on normal behavior, well, pretty much utterly useless. And then, of course, after the peak, you'll start to hear all the analysts talk about mean reversion. It's this very clean academic idea that the price will eventually just return to its average. But that simple headline hides a really, really messy reality. For anyone who's actually holding on after that peak, mean reversion doesn't feel clean at all. It feels like years of just frustrating, soul-crushing, stagnant price action. So if the old rules just don't work, what can we use, right? We obviously need a new lens, maybe a different kind of map. And this is exactly where a really interesting alternative framework comes in. It's called parabolic geometry. And the difference in the approach here is it's absolutely crucial. You see, traditional technical analysis, that's all about using computers to crunch massive amounts of long-term stats and averages. Parabolic geometry, though, it's much more of a manual process. It's about using hand-drawn visual logic, creating these sort of what-if sketches based on historical patterns, all to provide some much-needed context. So let's just define that a little more clearly. This is not about some algorithm spitting out a price target. No way. This is about a human analyst looking at past blow-offs, really identifying their unique shapes, and then using those shapes to build a kind of scaffold around the current price action. Bottom line, it's a tool for thinking, not a magic 8-ball. And this is a great illustration of how that thinking process actually works. First up, you've got to spot the extreme momentum. Then you go back and find historical anchors. Those are basically the starting points of past runs. From there, you actually draw your geometric scaffolds to frame the move. And then finally, you compare the shape of what's happening now to those past episodes, just to get a sense of what might be possible. Okay, so how does all this theory actually become a practical toolkit for an analyst? Well, let's take a look at the specific kinds of charts they use and what those charts are trying to tell us. And the toolkit is surprisingly comprehensive. You've got charts for hot market warnings. Think of those as early alerts. Then there are charts that help detect when a parabolic event is officially underway. You've got historical spike analogs, which are super cool. They let you literally overlay past runs right on top of the current one. And then you've got charts that try to sketch out potential scenarios and even possible support lines for what happens after the peak. Okay, I need you to listen closely here because this might just be the most important point in this whole explainer. When you see the word support on these kinds of charts, it does not mean a guaranteed price floor where a bounce is a sure thing. Not at all. It simply marks a price zone where, in the past, a big decline has sometimes, and I stress sometimes, paused. It is context, people. It is not a promise. All right, so as we start to wrap this up, let's try to distill all of this down into just a few key rules to remember, whether you're looking at this kind of analysis or you find yourself in this kind of market. And really, this famous quote is the guiding philosophy for all of it. History rhymes, it does not repeat. We use these historical examples to find the rhyme, the similar shape, that similar feeling, the similar market psychology, but we should never expect an exact repetition. Every single one of these events is unique, even if it feels incredibly familiar. And finally, just a few more really crucial things to keep in mind. First, using different starting points, those anchors we talked about, can give you very different pictures, so be aware of that. Also, this type of analysis is focused on the spot price, not on leveraged products like futures or options. And maybe most importantly, above all else, please remember that these hand-drawn lines are just illustrative guides. They are never guarantees. So there you have it. We've just explored a completely different way to look at one of the market's most extreme and chaotic behaviors. And really, it's not about prediction. It's all about preparation and context. Think of it like a map for a territory where, frankly, most people just get lost. So the only question left is, now that you have the map, where will you look for the rhymes?